You're the ones building the future, not me. Today is all about you. And what I want to try to help you do in the few minutes that I have to share with you is to understand how you build a lens to look at that future. Because the challenge we all face is that the lens we're given, that we grow up with, it gets cloudy over time. And as it gets cloudy, it becomes really tough to see the future. But it's not about predicting it. It's not about predicting it. It's about surviving it. So I want to help you to survive the future, help you better understand how you can build a future that you and your organizations can survive. So how do you begin? That's a pretty ambitious thing to do, right? How do you begin that? Well, let me share with you a bit about my lens and how it was formed a long time ago. I actually began my career wanting to be an engineer, and I wanted to be a civil engineer because I grew up in a household with my dad being a big-time engineer. He did some incredible things over the course of his life, and I wanted to be like Dad. I wanted to be an engineer. So I applied, of all things, to his alma mater, and I got accepted, which was absolutely amazing to me. I wasn't a great student in high school, and I was so proud. I went right to my father, and I said, Dad, you're not going to believe this? Look at this acceptance letter. I got accepted to your alma mater. And he said, that's great, Tom. What are you going to do? And I said, I'm going to be an engineer. And he looked at me. He said, what kind of engineer? I said, civil. Civil. Because my father was an electrical engineer. And he built small things. So I was going to build big things. And he looked at me with that wonderful, passionate gaze that fathers often have. And he said, Tom, if you built a bridge, it would be a beautiful bridge. I just wouldn't want to cross it. I thought, okay, thank you for those wonderful words of advice, Dad. I'm going to go to the orientation with my engineering friends, and I'm going to tell you what it's like to be an engineer, a civil engineer. So I went to the orientation, big school, right? So there were about 2,000 of us there, and I went with my best friend at the time, Sal, and we were seated in this huge auditorium, and at one point the dean of the engineering school got up. And he started looking at us, and he started on this rant. And as he was ranting at one point, he stopped and he said, look at what you're sitting on. What is it? And Sal and I looked at it, and we thought, Sal, it's a chair. Yeah, that's what it is. And in this very stern, curmudgeonly old voice, he grabbed the chair and he said, as an engineer, you don't see a chair when you look at this. What you see are 4 vectors of force. And I thought, shit, Dad was right. Because I don't want to see vectors of force. I don't want to go through my life looking at stuff and seeing vectors. I want to see the beauty in the world. I want to build beautiful things. And it took me a long time to finally get it. To get the fact that what this guy was telling us was that as an engineer, you have a lens. And that lens, the lens that you have, because that's what this is all about. It's about that lens. That lens shapes the way that you see and you build the future. And it is tough to keep that lens crystal clear. It just doesn't happen. It's not an easy thing to do. It just isn't. And I'm going to show you, hopefully, some ways that you can adopt a lens that'll make it easier to understand these game changers, things that are being thrust upon us that we don't have much choice over, but that we have to deal with anyway, and how you can build a future that's survivable as a result. Pretty ambitious discussion, right? So let me ask you at the outset, just to kind of get a level set, how many of you believe this statement? How many of you believe that everything that can be invented has been invented? Anyone? Raise your hand. A few of you do. And you know what? It's interesting because this is sort of the pinnacle of human arrogance, isn't it? We always put ourselves at that point in time where all the great stuff has been created. You know, as a kid growing up, my biggest fear was all the neat stuff had been done. I wouldn't be able to invent anything new because all the inventions had already occurred. And we always put ourselves at the pinnacle of arrogance. I'll tell you who said this at the very end of the presentation. But it's a theme that, whether we admit it or not, we tend to believe. So another question for you, simple one. I want you to think of a word, one word, that defines the steepest possible J-curve you can think of. A curve that has really resulted in all the progress over the last 200 years. One word. What would that word be? Yell it out. What would that word be? Innovation. Innovation. Great word. Absolutely. What else? Challenge. Challenge. Absolutely. Give me another one. Hope. What else? Vision. Let me ask the question a little differently and see if you can keep up with me here. What if that same word was going to define the way in which we would survive the future, how we would build all the things moving forward that will help us as organizations, as people, as a society, as a global community? Any new words come to mind? Imagination, fear, fear, uncertainty, purpose, perseverance. You know what? That word is what you do. The word I'm thinking of is what you do as an organization, as individuals. This is your job. The word I'm thinking of is connections. It is our ability to connect that differentiates us from any other civilization in the history of mankind. You know, I had relatives, I think I did anyway, at the foot of the Parthenon who sat and thought great thoughts, right? They invented democracy. Last great thing the Greeks did, given the current state of the Greek economy more than likely. But they thought great thoughts, and they thought to themselves, we are at the pinnacle of mankind's existence. What they didn't have was the connections, which is what you create. The foundation, the cornerstone for all progress, for all challenge, for every solution we've built or we're going to build to survive the future, and I mean now survive in the most literal sense, because what will get thrown at us, we just can't predict, will be the connections we create. The reliability of those connections, the pervasive nature of those connections, the global aspect of those connections. And if you don't believe me, look at your children and the way they're connecting. Entirely different from what you and I have become accustomed to. So I mentioned this lens, right? So let me show you how cloudy your lens has become. In just a few seconds. I want you to picture, in your mind's eye, picture an image of the world. Have you got it? It's an image of the world. When I asked that question, how many of you had this image in mind? Raise your hand. It's wild. It's about half of you. Raise your hand. This is probably the most iconic photograph ever taken in the history of mankind. Taken on an Apollo moonshot, the first full-face image of the Earth. You know what's funny about this image? When they first took it, it was upside down. They had to flip it over for mass consumption because the North Pole was on the south, the way the original photograph was taken. The blue marble floating in the blackness of outer space has defined generations in terms of the green movement, the way we look at our fragile planet. You know the image I had in mind? Someone asked me this question years ago, and the image that popped into my mind was this one. It was the map that hung in my grade school classroom. And where it says Russia across the Eurasian continent, you know what my image said? USSR. That's how stuck my lens was in time. Take this question and start asking it of people. And notice the demographic. Because I do a lot of work at the college level. I teach graduate students. When I ask them, what's your image of the world? You know what they come back with? Google Earth. That's their view of the world. You know, a world in motion, constantly changing. Did any of you have a weather satellite in mind when I said that? Did anyone think Google Earth? Did any of you, since it's your job to do this, have in your image of the world the connections, the satellites, the wiring, the cell phones, the cell phone towers? Did you have a computer in your image of the world? How could you not? You see how easy this lens gets clouded? And we form this view of the world that defines so precisely how we innovate. So my question again to you is, how do you future-proof your enterprise? How do you future-proof yourself? And how do you do it in a way that allows you, gives you license to survive the future? Well, you innovate. That's the answer, right? You innovate. What in the world does that mean? You innovate. I mean, we talk about being out of the box. You know, my son Adam, who's 12 years old, was in my study a few days ago, and he was actually watching me work on a presentation about being in the box and out of the box. And he said, Dad, what if you can't get out of the box? I said, what do you mean? He said, what if you're in a box and you can't get out of it? And I'm thinking, this is one of those teachable moments, right? I should come up with something really brilliant as a father. And I was coming short. I said, well, I guess you figure out how to get out of it. I said, what would you do, Adam? He said, I'd make sure it was a nicely decorated box, Dad. I'd put nice things in it. Isn't that what we do in our lives? We end up in a box, and we decorate it nicely. And it makes us feel more comfortable that we can control that box. But it's not the box we want to be in. Innovation is not being out of the box. That's half of innovation. That's the pie in the sky, let's get together, hold hands, and sing Kumbaya part of innovation, which I could do without. Getting out of the box is easy. The question is, which box do you want to be in? You as a person, your organization. What's the core competency that allows you to be in the right box? When I talk to kids, the first question I ask them is, what makes you better than 99.99% of the entire world? Which still leaves, 6 million people or so that are going to be better than you, even with those odds. What's your core competency? As an organization, as an industry, what do you do better than anyone else does? That's the box that you should be in. That's innovation. It's not getting out of the box, because we're always going to be constrained. It's getting into the right box. So what are the game changers that are going to constantly take you out of that box and force you to ask that question of yourself? What am I best at? How do I compete in this globally, incredibly dysfunctional world that's filled with uncertainty and complexity? And how do I innovate myself and my organization? Lesson number one, I said innovation. I didn't say invention. And we get so confused about this. Innovation is not invention. Innovation creates value. Invention creates stuff. We've got enough stuff in the world. And we've gotten confused. We measure innovation by how quickly we can take stuff from the shelf to the landfill. That's not innovation. That's just moving more stuff around. How many cell phones are provisioned globally today? Throw the number out at me. How many cell phones are provisioned? You should know. How many? More than 1 billion. It's more than 2. 5 billion provisioned cell phones. Does that math make sense to you? There are some 6-odd billion people on the planet. I'm sure at least 1 billion or so must be under the age of 12, so we're saying every human being has a cell phone over the age of 12? Now, granted, some people have more than one number. I understand that. Behavior is changing in ways that far exceeds technology's capability. Behavior is leading the way. Anyone ever use one of these? Anyone? A few hands are going up. I know the demographic of the room. I could tell by the music playing before I came up here, right? So I know a few of you have used one of these. Did anyone write more than one page, a thesis, a book on one of these typewriters? Anyone? My kids come into my study at home. I love to collect old typewriters. They come into my study, they see these things, and they say, they love to play with them, first of all, right, because it's really kind of a novelty. But then they say, how did you think with one of these, Dad? What do you mean, how did I think? I think up here. I don't think in the typewriter. There's no brain in the typewriter. But wait a minute. Their computers are an extension of how they think. I go back to using this typewriter or my IBM Selectric, and that tactile feel is so gratifying. But then I realized to myself, I've written 8 books. I probably couldn't have written one if I didn't have my laptop, because it is an extension of the way I think. You see, what's changed is not so much the technology. What's changed is the behavior. We think using the technology. It's a change not in just the tool. It's a change in me, the person. And this silly little device here, your iPhone, your iPad, your touch, this isn't a technology. This is the way you think, and it's an extension of yourself, of your brain. What changes is behavior. Innovation is not innovation if it doesn't change behavior ultimately. And that's one of those things that's so difficult for us to understand. And because it's so difficult to understand, we always fall short of predicting the future. mean, I hate this term futurist. You know, I talk about it, I use it, yeah, because we're accustomed to it. But none of us really can predict the future. Things are changing way too fast. There are some things that are 6 months out, a year out that, yeah, we can bet on. But the future, the distant future, it'll be so much more perverse than anything we can begin to imagine today. What might it look like? Well, here you are in the shopping mall, not of tomorrow, the shopping mall of today. Because if you have a cell phone, I could do this. I could do this right now. You're tagged as you come in. I know your buying preferences. I know what you want to do because I've seen your closet. I know what kind of eyeglasses you need because I've seen your prescriptions. I can make sure I sell you an annuity for eyeglasses for the next 20 years. You go to the food court, I know what you should order because I've got access to your DNA and your genetic profile. I can tell you not to get that cheeseburger. It's not good for you. This is not tomorrow, right? This is today. This is the world we're living in now. It's not about the technology. The technology to do all of this is there. It is about the behavior. And with 5 billion provisioned cell phones, this is just a stone's throw away. This is not the future. So often when we talk about the future, we talk about the quirky, anecdotal things like this. This isn't the future. The future is about taking what we already have and repurposing it to create value that will make it a survivable future for us and for our children. So how does that work? Well, let's think about this for a minute. I said that we often confuse innovation with invention. So what I'd like to do is play a little game with you, if I can. I'd like to take you down a path of what I call real or not real. So give me a second here. Let me cue this up. And I'm going to ask you some questions. You know the game Deal or No Deal, right? Seen this on TV? My kids love this. It's the epitome of human greed. I'm going to change it up on you a bit. I'm going to play real or not real. See the resemblance? My wife says don't ever go bald. Don't ever go bald. All right, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to give you some devices, and I want you to tell me whether they exist or do not exist. The first one is this wonderful device that attaches your laptop to your steering wheel. You can tell it's an old one, too, because the laptop's pretty old, right? And a genuine feat of engineering prowess. You can see the heads-up display there, really slick. Real or not real? How many say it's real? Absolutely. $40, you too can have one of these. I'm not sure what it does to your insurance policy or your premium. And the lawyers got to it, as you can see, use whenever safely parked. It gets better. A USB cup warmer that you can plug into your laptop on your steering wheel so you can have breakfast on the go. Real or not real? What do you think? Real? You bet. How many own one? Come on. Gets even better. The e-holster. This is not for armaments, for guns and stuff. This is for all your PDAs and your portable keyboards and your iPads and your iPods and your smartphones. Real or not real? eholster.com. Real? You betcha. Do you own one? Yeah, I do. I do. I would not wear it through TSA security, just a word of caution. Go to eholster.com. You can buy this in ballistic nylon and leather. The MSN iLoo, one of my favorites. Before you tell me real or not real, let me point out to you some of the subtleties of the MSN iLoo. This is an internet-enabled porta-potty. Notice carefully that there's an internet connection on the inside and on the outside. Everything okay in there? Everything's fine. Real or not real? It's a spoof. It's a spoof. But yeah, it's believable. Absolutely believable. It gets better. This is a recent one I saw. And the Bible of all this stuff is where? There is a Bible for all of this. It's called the Sky Mall Catalog. Okay? So when you fly home, I challenge you to pick one of these up and put it down without finding something absolutely essential to your quality of life. I need for nothing. I cannot go through a Sky Mall catalog and not want for something. It's just not possible. My daughter saw this when I brought it home one day, and she said, "Dad, who buys this stuff?" I don't know. It's like a market of one for most of it. I love this device. This is for all of you in the younger demographic. You ever go searching for your cell phone? It's not cool anymore to wear your cell phone in your belt loop, right? You got to put it in your pockets. We're always stumbling around trying to find it. This is the Ninja cell phone holder. When you need it, bang, right there. Sweet, huh? Real or not real? How many say it's real? Absolutely. Positively real. Are you kidding? It's absurd. We invent because we can. My favorite, and this is the last one, is the look-see. This is not a Bluetooth microphone and earpiece. This is a video cam that you attach to your ear so you can record your life 24/7 and upload it immediately to YouTube or Facebook. I don't know about you, my life is not this interesting. It really isn't. Kids will never be able to forget. Forgetting is a thing of the past. And you know, we're getting it all wrong. Because you think to yourself, hey, wait a minute, you know, this kid's going to go for an interview, they're going to look him up on Facebook or her on Facebook, they're going to see their past, and they're going to see all this bad stuff that they've done, things they've posted. That's a very old way to look at it. Because you know what? That works as long as the boss doesn't have a Facebook account. Once that generation moves to the workforce and they're all on a level playing field and they've all had 20 years of Facebook history, it's just not going to matter. Will it be dysfunctional? To you and me, completely. But you see, that's not a technology issue. It's a behavioral issue. And when we try to predict the future, we're trying to predict technology. That's easy. Will computers be faster? Yeah. Will we need more memory? Yeah. Will we go to the cloud? Yeah. But how will behavior change? That's the part that we never are able to predict well and accurately. Remember this guy? Maxwell Smart? I love Invention and Technology magazine. I don't know if any of you subscribe to it. It's a wonderful publication. I usually leave it on the kitchen table hoping my kids will pick it up, you know, enlighten them a little bit on how we've gotten to where we are today. So I brought this issue home last year or the year before, I can't remember, it's a bit dated now, and it had Maxwell Smart on the cover. About the time that the new Get Smart movie was coming out, my daughter saw it, and she said, Dad, I don't get this. Is this supposed to be funny? So I gave her the whole story about Maxwell Smart, secret agent, you know, shoe phone. And she said, no, I get that, Dad. I understand that. But why isn't he just using his cell phone? I said, Mia, we didn't have cell phones. This is what we thought cell phones would look like. And by the way, look, it's a rotary dial shoe. It's not even a touch-tone shoe. How do we get the future so wrong? Did anyone own one of these, the Motorola Brick? Anybody? World War II walkie-talkie. This thing was incredibly clunky, and we were so proud to have one. My first car phone cost me $4,000, and the thing I liked most about it is when the phone rang, it would honk the horn. The whole neighborhood knew I had a cell phone. What was the projection for the number of cell phones in use at this point in time when the brick was first introduced? How many, the most outrageous pundits projected how many cell phones would be in use today, 2010. How many? 5 million. Little higher, little higher. 10. 10 million is the most outrageous projection you can uncover. 10 million. 5 billion. That's not a rounding error. How do we get it so wrong? Because we always try to predict the technology. We can't predict the behavior. You know, when I come up here with Steve Wozniak on Thursday and we chat about this, and I've talked to him about these things, the stuff that you can never, no matter how steeped you are in this, the stuff you can never imagine is how behavior will change. When this thing was introduced back in 2001, it was not a good time to introduce new technology, right? It was land-based. People thought this was a ridiculous device because MP3 players had already existed. What's the big deal? What we couldn't bank on was not the technology. What we couldn't bank on was how the behavior would change. And that certainly has changed. I can't imagine living life today without iTunes, without my iPod and my iPad. And it is that piece that we constantly fail to understand when it comes to innovation. Game changer one. Surviving the future is about understanding the behavior of change, not the technology of change. Innovation is about adding value through behavior. Innovation is not about technology. It's about adding value through behavior. Who is this guy? Come on, some of you I know this. Who is this guy? First U.S. astronaut to walk in space. His name was? Ed White. Thank you, absolutely. Ed White. And the story told about Ed White, I did some work with NASA a while back, and I heard all these anecdotes about what happened in the first moonwalk. Ed White just barely made it back into the spacecraft. He tore his suit coming back in, almost had a major malfunction and catastrophe. But Ed White did not want to come back into the spacecraft. When I think of uncertainty, I think of the space age, the Apollo generation that so many of us grew up with, because it was complete unknown. My kids asked me yesterday, Dad, when they sent all those monkeys and dogs into outer space, what happened to them? Didn't have the heart to tell them. They didn't come back, by and large. Why'd they send monkeys into outer space, they asked. Because we didn't know what would happen. We thought your eyeballs would pop out of your sockets. We thought your blood would boil. We didn't think human beings and human organs would be able to survive in the zero-G pure vacuum of outer space. The reason I put Ed White up here is because all the brilliant scientists at NASA, even after Russia had put a man into outer space, because Russians were the first to do an EVA, not the Americans. And the Russian fellow barely made it back in because his spacesuit inflated as he was out, and he had to manually deflate his spacesuit to get back into the hatch. So poor Ed White is out there. He's out there for much longer than NASA wants him out there. He's pulling himself back in. He's run out of propellant in his little air canister. He's pulling himself back in with his tether. He gets back in, takes off his spacesuit, and the poor guy is just drenched. Drenched. He lost 7 pounds in perspiration. And he goes back to NASA. They do the debrief, and he says, guys, man, it was hot up there. It was great, but it was hot. And they said, Ed, you were probably just excited. You sweat when you're excited. Ed said, no, I'm not excitable. That wasn't the deal. Something was wrong. Something was wrong. You know what was wrong? The brilliant scientists at NASA had air-cooled the suit. They hadn't liquid-cooled it. You guys know this from wiring. When you liquid-cool something, it's like, what, 3,500 times more efficient than air-cooling it. How can you be that stupid and be that smart? These were guys that could use slide rules. They were smart people, right? They didn't rely on calculators. The future always has inherent uncertainty. And the one thing, if you ask people, what is the sensation that most bothers you about the present day? It is that sensation of uncertainty. It surrounds us. It's pervasive. It's everywhere. And it's tough to get away from it. But you know what? I don't want you to get away from it. It's not about getting away from it. It's about figuring out how you deal with it. How do you deal with that uncertainty? So let me give you a quick illustration of what I mean. Because uncertainty is one of these things that I'm not sure we quite grasp and understand fully. So let me begin by talking about this thing called the uncertainty principle. And the way it works is very, very simple. As uncertainty goes up, so does opportunity. As uncertainty goes up, so does opportunity. As opportunity increases, the duration of each opportunity decreases. So therefore, as uncertainty increases, the duration of each opportunity decreases. Which means you have to react in shorter and shorter intervals of time. Is that the way it feels, right? When you're doing whatever you do at work, right? It's the time pressure to do the right thing in a shorter and shorter interval that most bothers us. But we still don't quite get uncertainty. We're just beginning to understand the implications of it. I remember where I was on 9/11. I had walked into Delphi's headquarters. We had about 70 folks in our company that were watching the plasma monitors, and the first plane had flown to the first tower. And I'm a private pilot from way back when, and I saw that, and I still didn't get it. I thought at that point some poor idiot in a Cessna flew into the World Trade Center. It wasn't in my playbook. It wasn't in my playbook that a plane could be used as a weapon of mass destruction. It wasn't one of the rules that I had. And let me prove to you how difficult this notion of uncertainty really is to comprehend. Give me a game, a board game, a sports game, any kind of game that you think epitomizes uncertainty. Yell it out. Give me a game. Yahtzee. Good one. Often comes up. Yahtzee. Great game. What else? Monopoly. People always say Monopoly. Risk. Stratego. What else? Give me another one. Life. Someone once said marriage to me. I think he meant the game of life, the board game of life, yes. Chess often comes up. Games of chance, games that you might play in a casino often come up. Roulette, games involving cards, dice, these kinds of things. What if I were to tell you that not one of these is a game of uncertainty? Not a single one. There is not a game you could come up with that is truly a game of uncertainty. Because these are games of what? Probability. The casino never loses. It's why they're so well built and so nicely decorated. Right? The casino never loses. These are games of probability. Uncertainty, I'll give you a game of uncertainty. Play chess with a 5-year-old, where the king can leave the board, go to the other room, and not come back until you give up. My rules, I make them up, my game. You want to play with me? It's the way it goes. That's a game of uncertainty. And uncertainty frustrates us because there are no rules. We don't like that. We want rules. But when the rules change in shorter and shorter intervals of time, it takes a tremendous toll on us emotionally. So when I say survive the future, survive uncertainty, this is what I'm talking about. How do we avoid the blame game? You know, who's at fault? Is it my fault? Is it your fault? Is it the system's fault? It doesn't really matter at the end of the day. It is an uncertainty that our kids are going to have to live with. And we're just beginning to understand the depth and the magnitude of that uncertainty. And it has value. Solving that problem, doing what you do, has value because it reduces uncertainty. The reliability of my connections increases the level of certainty. Anything I can do to increase certainty in this day and age has huge value. So I was at the Ritz-Carlton on the west coast of Florida some weeks ago, and someone had parked one of these beautiful Bugattis out front, and I was admiring it, and the valet came over and said, yeah, can you believe that thing costs $1.5 million? I said, $1.5 million for a car? So my brain started working. I thought, what does that equate to on a per-pound basis? Right? So you want to buy a Bugatti? Not that expensive on a per-pound basis. About $300 or so. You know, depending on what you get for accessories, maybe $400 a pound. Not bad, right? I thought, what's an iPhone cost per pound? $1,500, and that's without the apps. You put the apps on it, it's about 40 grand per pound for that iPhone. I thought, wow, you know, the iPhone kind of helps me deal with the uncertainty of my life, has higher value. What else does that? So I thought, pharmaceuticals have high value, help me deal with the uncertainty of life, and I started doing a little bit of math, and I thought, Viagra, $12,000 a pound, and worth every penny of it. Not that I would know, I'm just saying. Someone's really laughing, okay. What else? The highest hedge against uncertainty is the stuff that powers our modern lives. If you look at an Intel's latest processor, you're looking at about $25,000 or so per pound. Interesting way to look at this notion of uncertainty and how it factors into our lives and how we value it. We value innovation when it helps us to deal with uncertainty. But you know what? I'm really underplaying this. Because the biggest problem in dealing with uncertainty is success. Your success creates a lens that makes it virtually impossible for you to deal with uncertainty. And I'll prove it to you in about 12 seconds. Keep your eyes on the screen. Don't take them off the screen until I tell you to. Watch the girl spinning. Tell me which way she is spinning. If she's spinning clockwise, raise your hand. Clockwise. Okay, if she's going counterclockwise, raise your hand. Right down the middle, pretty much half and half. Pretty much half and half. Here's the test. Don't take your eyes off the girl. I want you to change the direction of spin. If she was originally going clockwise, make her go counterclockwise. If she was originally going counterclockwise, make her go clockwise. How many of you can do it? Change the direction of spin. 10, 15% maybe. What's wrong with us? Why can't we change it? There is no spin here, by the way. There's no clockwise, counterclockwise. All you're seeing is silhouettes. They look the same from the front to the back. There is no spin. Because what you have up here is the most magnificent pattern matching engine in the history of the world. We see a pattern, we decide upon it, we will not change it. We refuse to change it. And as individuals we do that, but as organizations we do that. So you get a new job, you show up at orientation, the CEO says, here at ABC Corp, we succeed because the girl always spins clockwise. You don't see that. You see her spinning counterclockwise. You're going to raise your hand? You like this job. You really want this job. No, you're going to suck it up. Next day you come back and your coworker says, hey, what about that clockwise spinning girl? Eventually, if you want the job, you're going to see her spinning clockwise. And then you'll convince others she's spinning clockwise. And I work with these huge innovators, and they can't stop the clockwise spin. The level of disruption needed, the crisis needed to stop the clockwise spin. Look at the U.S. automobile industry. The level of crisis needed to stop the spin is extraordinary. And yet there are people who can see the girl spinning in the other direction, metaphorically speaking. By the way, if you really think you've got this down, try the next one. Make the girl on the left spin counterclockwise, the one on the right spin clockwise. Can anyone do it? Anyone? I want to see one hand go up. Just one. Because I have never, ever, with tens of thousands of people I've done this with, never seen anyone raise their hand. The human mind is a pattern matching engine. When we see success, we stick with it all the way to the grave. It's what we're built to do. How do you solve that? Disruption. Disruption is the only way that you can solve this problem. It's why small companies will succeed when large companies simply can't move into a new marketplace. How many of you owned one of these? Right? The first commercially successful pocketable transistor radio. It was called pocketable. You know why it was called pocketable? Because when Akio Morita, the co-founder and CEO of Sony, brought this to the market, it wouldn't fit in a pocket, a regular pocket, so he had double width pockets stitched on the shirts of his salespeople to call it a pocketable transistor radio. There have been 6 billion pocketable transistor radios sold over the course of the last century. 6 billion. I mean, Sony owned that marketplace. They invented nothing. This was pure innovation. All the componentry existed. They licensed the transistor from Westinghouse. I mean, you can go on and on about how this was not an invention. This was just innovation, pure innovation, which Sony was great at. Because Sony came back again, and they did this with the iconic device of my generation and maybe yours, the Walkman. How many of these have you owned in your life? Right, a dozen maybe? I mean, Sony owned the music industry. They had it in an iron fist. There was no excuse for them to lose that industry. Akio Morita left, and they lost it. They owned the labels, they owned the artists, they owned the devices and the platforms. Great business model, but they lost it. To who? Because they had the MP3 players. They had everything they needed. The technology was not the issue. They lost it to Apple. They lost it to Apple, which is kind of like saying, buy your next luxury car from Maytag. They have no business building luxury cars. Apple had no business building devices for music. But what did Apple get? Apple got the behavior. It wasn't about the technology. And Apple invented nothing. I mean, in the innovation zone, I talk about the fact that even the guy who invented the original portal player and the iPod and pretty much the way that you saw it in its first generation in 2001, Tony Fadell, he wasn't at Apple. He went to every MP3 player manufacturer and he said, I've got an idea. And they all said, you're crazy. The model exists. We don't need a new MP3 player. Apple embraced it. And they changed the behavior of the marketplace. And they invented nothing. But that black screen helped me deal with uncertainty. Apps help me deal with uncertainty. They at least give me the illusion that I have some control over my life and over technology. This thing that you see is not a diver's uniform. Right? This is one of the early suits that they used to help pilots fly planes when planes were able to fly at more G-forces than the pilots could sustain. So they built these very awkward suits that sort of forced the blood back into their brain. The reason I put this up there is that when I think of complexity, I feel like we're living in these G-suits, these very primitive G-suits, where the technology we have is so much more capable, but our behaviors just haven't caught up yet to the technologies. And we're in pain because of it. We struggle with it. So how many of you have an iPad at this point? Show of hands. Not that many. Not that many. Interesting. How many of you love your iPad? You can't live without it. Show of hands. Not quite. It's funny because this thing's been so successful, and yet, you know, we still don't quite get it or what it's for. And I've got a basic philosophy behind this, by the way. My philosophy is that Steve Jobs, was just getting older, and he got tired of doing what I'm doing, and he went to this form factor, which is a whole lot easier to read than this is. That's my take on it. I'm gonna ask Wozniak about that on Thursday. What's the killer app for this? It's a black screen. What's the killer app for this? The killer app for this is dealing with complexity. That's the killer app. It helps me deal with complexity. I went to buy this. Took my daughter in tow, Mia, 15 years old. I thought she would say, hey, Dad, you're a cool guy. You're buying an iPad. She said to me, Dad, it's an overgrown iPhone. What are you doing? I thought, Mia, this is really incredible. She doesn't need it. She doesn't need to deal with the complexity. She can do it intuitively. For her, it's not technology. Technology is what you don't grow up with. For me, this is technology. I didn't grow up with this. For her, she doesn't need it. She deals with the complexity in other ways. I do have a killer app for this, by the way. For those of you that go to the gym and work out and you go with your MP3 player strapped to your, your bicep or your leg or whatever, my killer app for all of you older guys like me that really want to show up those younger guys in the health club, forget building big muscles, show up with one of these, okay? You'll be the envy of all the 20-year-olds. It's in the patent process. I don't know what the killer app is yet. I know that it helps me deal with this complexity. Complexity that comes from a marketplace that's moved from this lower left-hand quadrant where everything was about product and ownership to this upper right-hand quadrant where it's all about strategy and service. It's all market-driven, hugely complex. It's a maze, which is what you deal with in these buildings. It's a maze of complexity that defies a lot of the tools that we currently use. And we talk about moving to the cloud to do this. Well, here's my take on the cloud. The cloud is about dealing with complexity, but it's also about creating flexibility in how we deal with it. Because today, the more complexity you have, the less flexibility you have. So you start with a good idea, or you start with a new building, and you have infinite flexibility. You can do whatever you want. But over time, as the complexity, the scale, the scope increases and creeps up, what do you lose? You lose flexibility. In my mind, the cloud is about maintaining, making it something other than a zero-sum game, maintaining flexibility while I create scale and scope and complexity. And it allows us as organizations and as individuals, frankly, to maintain our choices, to continue developing and creating value long after that flexibility would otherwise be gone. If you want to know more about I'm not going to get onto the cloud right now, but what the cloud does is it changes the economics of how the game is played. Fundamentally, it changes the economics. My dad, the engineer, right, we were having one of these wonderful conversations once when I was a kid at the kitchen table, and there was a glass, half full, kind of like this one, and he pulled the proverbial, so, Tom, what do you think? Is it half full or half empty? And I looked at it, and I said, I got this one, right? I'm going to show Dad I'm an optimist. I said, Dad, it's half full. And he said, this was during my engineering heyday, and he said, Tom, if you're going to be an engineer, that's not the way to look at the glass. I said, what, you mean it's half empty? Because I got to fill it up? He goes, no, it's not half empty, it's not half full. I said, well, Dad, what the hell is it? He said, Tom, the glass is the wrong size. That's the way engineers look at things. That was the most profound thing my father ever said to me, I think. So far, we haven't been buying the right size glass. You want to build a company, you got to buy a lot of infrastructure. You need a lot of power. Not any longer. 9-year-old kids are building companies in the cloud. It is that leveling effect. I'm working with folks in Romania and India and the Philippines. It just doesn't matter anymore. You can move work, you can move people, you can move information. These connections that we talked about are changing the economics of how we build value. And that, to me, is exciting. You want to really know about the cloud? Go to SETI at home, download one of these apps that allows you to search for life in the universe. This thing is the biggest supercomputer ever made by mankind. It doesn't exist. It uses millions upon millions of individual computers that people volunteer. One of them is mine. There are many of you probably in the room that subscribe to this. And it creates a big supercomputer from this. The cloud generates value from what's already there. That, to me, is innovation. Right? It changes a behavior. It creates value from what already exists. It's not about invention. It's about creating value. The last one I'm going to leave you with, and we'll close on this one, and it probably is, in my mind, the most fascinating discussion and the biggest game changer, because I just don't know how this is going to play out. It's just not clear to me yet, is the generational multiplication that we're experiencing in all of our companies. You've got 4 generations working side by side. And you know what's fascinating, talking about behavior? Look at the Nobel Prize, cut the last century in half. First half of the last century, just 4 Nobels awarded to teams, just 4. Second half of the last century, 36 in the physical sciences, Nobels to teams. I will tell you, by 2025, nothing will be invented by individuals. It's all going to be about team-based innovation. This is more than a trend. This is a global cultural phenomenon. It is a psychology that's changing radically across the globe. It's not US-centric. So where do you play in that? What generation are you part of? Don't answer it based on age. It's not about these labels. these aren't generational labels, right? These are media labels. These are labels that create buckets, that make it easy to talk about the problem. But these aren't the labels I want you to use. What I want you to do is answer a few simple questions to tell you what demographic you fall into. So you're at home. You want to get in touch with your son, your daughter, your wife, your husband. Do you pick up the phone and call them? My daughter saw this and she said, "Dad, that is so old school. I would never call you if I was up in my room and wanted to come down to dinner. I would text you, of course. Absolutely. I mean, how ridiculous is this? Mia, time for dinner. Come down, please." It's absurd in ways that we can't even begin to understand. How many of you, first thing you do in the morning, first thing is check your email? Number one. Come on, show those hands. Let me see it. Yeah, right. I do. My iPad's right there by my bedside. How many of you do it as the second thing? First or second? How many of you do the first and second thing together? Yeah, okay. Ever had a panic attack because you forgot your cell phone? My wife and I constantly have this battle over Facebook. Who's got the most friends? Gentlemen, this is just for the guys in the room. If your wife ever unfriends you on Facebook, the doghouse will be a step up on the social ladder. Not that I have any experience there. I'm just saying. Just keep this in mind. Talk to kids about dialing. Do they know what a dial is? My son, for the first time in his life, used a rotary phone not too long ago. I had my old AT&T black rotary phone. I refurbished it. It's a beautiful piece of art. It belongs in like the Museum of Art. And I have it upstairs in the attic in his playroom. And he said to me, "Dad, can I use that phone?" I said, "Yeah, it's hooked up. Go ahead, you can use it." He said, "Well, how do I use it, Dad?" I said, "Well, you pick up the little receiver there and you stick your finger in the number and you turn it." He said, "Wow." So he picks up the receiver, he gets the dial tone, says, "Okay, it's working, Dad." Sticks his finger in the one, turns it. It's not doing anything. I said, "Adam, pull your finger out." He didn't know what it meant to dial. He had no idea. He'd never heard that rotary sound. Right? For those that really want to go retro and impress your friends and your kids, there's a great app on the iPhone for this, by the way. I love this one, absolutely. Anyone shop at Land's End? Because these generations, they're all about personalization. They don't want to buy clothes, they want to buy their clothes. So go to landsend.com. Have you built an avatar on landsend.com yet? Anyone? Oh, so you got to do this. Go to landsend.com. You can define your own personal avatar. And you define your hair color, your body size, your shoe size, your inseam, things you would never tell your closest friend, but you'll impart to the internet willingly. Go figure, right? So I came home. I did this a few years ago. The CFO at Land's End told me about this, and I came home. I built my avatar. My wife happened to catch wind of this. So she wanted to do it as well. So I said, go ahead, log on. Here's how you do it and build your avatar. I've got to tell you something. We compared avatars. She fudged the numbers a little bit. Not that she needed to. All right, there's a thing of a gender issue going on here. But she fudged them. You've got to be brutally honest. If you're brutally honest, you will get the best pair of jeans or chinos you've ever had in your whole life. So let me show you my avatar. I won't show you hers, but I'll show you my avatar. So if you're dirt honest with this... What? Why do I always get that reaction to this? This is exactly what I looked like at 27, I promise. You can build your own avatar. You can share dressing rooms with friends. You can have friends dress you. You create your avatar and create preferences for it. And they've got 2 million body types in the cloud. 2 million body types in the cloud that they will match you to. I never thought there were more like 3 or 4 body types in the world. 2 million body types. And you'll get a pair of chinos. They cost a few bucks more. 70% of the people that go this far and build their avatar will buy the clothes for it. Personalization, connecting the experience. When you talk about intelligent buildings, it upsets me so much that I can track every penny I spend, but I don't know where my energy expenses go to. Someone please give me an intelligent home that will actually tell me that. I've got a friend of mine in China who's built a company called Keynote. The Keynote box will provide you with reports about how you're using energy in your home. I love that. Personalize my home experience, my home energy experience for me. It's all about personalization. The future is not going to exist without this because there's too much uncertainty, complexity for me to deal with it all. Way too much for me to deal with it all as a mere mortal. And personalization is key to how this will be done. But it won't be done as a solo flight. These kids won't do it alone. They're not doing it alone. My son doesn't play with Legos the way I used to play with Legos. He socializes Legos. Remember Legos? Did you guys play with them? And then, big pile of Legos. There were no kits back when I was a kid. Use your imagination. Build your own toy. Well, it's gone beyond kits. My son goes to Lego.com, and he ends up using something that looks like a CAD system, for all I can tell. And this is the way he experiences play. And what's neat about it is once he's built his Lego device, yeah, he can package it and have it shipped to the house, but he can socialize it. And his friends can build on top of it. And for him, that's the pleasure of the experience, is giving up the IP, sharing the IP, seeing what comes back when others add to it. He thinks nothing of that. He's not giving anything up. He's gaining by doing that. He's not giving up by doing that. It's not the way that we think. And does it bug me that he spends 8 hours a day, doing this? Yeah. I said the stupidest thing, do not ever repeat what you're about to hear. I said the stupidest thing to my son a few weeks ago. I said, Adam, damn it, get off the computer and go watch some TV. I'm struggling with this. I don't know about you. I'm just not getting it. I'm just not getting it. Last thing I want to leave you with. Don't ever buy into this notion that it's about predicting technology. It's not. It's about changing behavior. Remember this clip from the Titanic? They see the iceberg from the crow's nest. Right away, they dial it in. You know what's amazing about the Titanic is they did everything right. They did everything right. But it was a behavior for an older generation of ship. But they did it all right for an older generation of ship. And they sealed the fate of the Titanic in one crucial instant. There was one moment after which there was no turning back, after which the fate of the Titanic was sealed. They're closing the dampers so that they can shut the engines down and put them into full astern. The chief engineer gives the order, engage and reverse the engines. Right then, physics took over. The Titanic had 3 screws. It wouldn't turn. She couldn't turn. There was no maneuverability when you put it into full astern. You had to oscillate the screws. You had to deal with uncertainty in a smaller interval of time. They couldn't do any of that. But you know what? Forget what I just said. Don't worry about any of that. Remember one thing. Look at the eyes of the first officer. Why isn't she turning? You ever see that look in the eyes of leadership, that look of fear, uncertainty, overwhelmed by complexity? You ever see that look? You got it? Get the hell out of there. It is not where you want to be. This is not the way the future is built. The future is about behavior. It's about letting go of the arrogance of the lens that we've embraced and grown up with, that we've built over so many decades, and allowing disruption to enter our lives. That's the way you stay young. Who said this? Charles Duell, Commissioner of the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, circa 1899. Supreme arrogance, which carries forth to this day. You're building organizations. Can I give you one last piece of advice? Build organizations that you'd want your own children to work for, that deserve their brilliance. If you're doing that, then you're building the right future. Thank you. Thank you very much.